is what is, taking place in the wokeism. Whether you have the men who, you have some men who are like, women are trying to, take us over. And then you have women who are trying to, are just, very involved in these feminist movement. I think it's like the third wave feminism is what some people are calling it.
Well, I will say part of the suppressed information that we don't learn about in school is that there have been cultures in the past where there has been a different balance of power, more egalitarian. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting is that when it's not a patriarchal government, when it's not a patriarchal society, which we have now, when it's more egalitarian, not that women are ruling over men, but that there's more of a balance of power. Sexuality is not restricted. It's not. So now we have this kind of puritanical culture, right? I don't know if you were around when Janet Jackson had that wardrobe malfunction a while back, right? At the halftime during the Super Bowl. And like the whole country was just like, oh my God, her boob showed, but it had like a pasty thing on it. Like people were freaked out, right? But at the same time, there's this guy that wrote this book called America Unzipped. He's an MSNBC columnist on sexuality. And he was getting all these letters from people that were talking about these like really like bizarre things that they were doing in their private life sexually. And so he traveled the country documenting what people were doing. And he found out that Americans, they will say in public, oh, that's totally wrong. But in private, they're like having like mass orgies, or they're going to like S&M bars, BDSM places, like they're doing like wild stuff, right? And that, and some of it is like, I would say it's really taking us away from the possibility that sex really presents to us, because in my personal belief, when you add pain and violence to sex, you don't have the possibility of getting to the psychedelic state, which I talk about in my classes. It's just the opposite of what the nervous system, there's a whole science to it, and it's not going to trigger the same type of psychedelic state. It'll trigger a disassociated state, but not a psychedelic state, in my opinion, from reading the research and also from working with people and so forth. But when you have a puritanical attitude in a country like we do about sex, I grew up in Ireland. Ireland was very suppressed, but there are parts of Europe that haven't been that way. Quebec, for instance, I used to live in Canada. It's very different. For instance, when you swear in Quebec, you don't say fuck, you say tabernacle, which is the Eucharist. So they have a much more relaxed idea about sex, and they just have a whole different view of it. But what I'm trying to say here is that when there is a different type of balance of power in a culture, there is less of a puritanical, there's less of this tug of war between, oh, we have to look like we're not interested in it all, and we would never cheat on our wife, or we'd never do anything like that, right? Never look at a porn site. But at the same time, there's like child trafficking going on, and sex trafficking is more of an epidemic than it's ever been in the world today, right? So there's this juxtaposition that's happening. There are cultures in ancient history. Now, not everyone's going to believe this because it's not reported in the mainstream education, but I follow Peggy Sanday's work, who's an anthropologist from the University of Pennsylvania, and she's done detailed research on this. There are civilizations who had no rape, who had no sexual violence. And interestingly enough, it's not that they held sex as bad. It's not that they had this puritanical attitude. Quite the opposite. Sex was celebrated. In fact, there's a ritual called Hieroskamos that would be celebrated where two people have sex in front of a whole community. And so it was very sacred, almost like doing a ayahuasca ceremony with a shaman, right? So there was a sacred sacramental aspect to sex. There was certainly pornography. There were naked pictures of women, but it was the female body was seen as a portal to the divine, right? And the last known, well, one of the civilizations that had this was in Crete 5,000 years ago, in, you know, the island of Greece. And, you know, women walked around with these outfits that their breasts showed all the time, right? And men walked around with these outfits where their private parts were really exposed, right? In these tight-fitting costumes. And you would think, oh my gosh, you know, if we're thinking about how the Taliban looks at things, right? Women have to have just like their whole body covered, or else there could be some kind of like compulsion for a man to rape them. That's bullshit. It's totally wrong. Because if you look at these other cultures where there was this free expression of sex, there wasn't rape. She wrote her book called Male Domination, and I can't remember the total title, but it's Peggy Sanday. And what she wanted to show is that when you have a more permissive sexual society where the female sexuality is honored in a divine way, that it actually accesses the divine, this whole thing about rape and sexual violence doesn't happen. And there's this meme going around on Facebook right now where some of the women I know